Hey listeners, happy April 1st. As many of you know, today would have been Craig Elmer Kelly's 55th birthday. And in honor of the greatest snowboarder who ever lived, I've put together a bonus episode with a very special guest, Jacques Russo, the man behind the Craig movies, The Smooth Groove, Board with the World, and Let It Ride. Jacques was a friend of Craig's, as you'll hear, and also a close friend with Jake, so there's some insight there as well. I'm really excited to bring you this episode, you guys. I hope you enjoy.
First time I met Craig Kelly, it's actually an interesting story. I've been told by other people. I was involved in making mountain films, and I was doing ski films, and I was looking for some sponsors in the ski industry, and I went to Montreal, and I think it was the Hart Skis dealer, and I walked in there, and I said, I'm looking for sponsorship, and then he said, oh, you live in Vancouver? I go, yeah. He goes, there's a guy there close to where you live who's the world champion in snowboarding. And I went, what's snowboarding? And that was 1985. And he goes, snowboarding. He goes, oh yeah. He goes, it's like we're the Burton rep here for snowboarding, and this is this new sport, and this guy is the world champion. And I in those days I was taking seminars on how to like market your films, how to make films, and one of the things a theme that came often is when you're making a film, if you can have a star, the star power, that will help you get the money to make that film. And then, so then I went, world champion. Well, that's a good start. And then I went snowboarding. So this is a new sport. And he goes, yeah. And I go, well, that's a story right there. So then I came home and I chat with my then girlfriend, who's now my wife. And I said, apparently there's this guy just out of here. And can't remember how I track him down, but I got his phone number. And I said, hey, my name is Jacques, and I'm, living in Vancouver, and I'm thinking about making a movie about you. And so he said, oh, yeah. He said, well, why don't you come and visit? I go, sure. So I went down and met him in Mount Vernon, and that's where it started.
Wonderful. Amazing. And what was he like to meet?
Well, first of all, I had no idea about the sport, right? So for me, it was just like meeting any guy that I would go climb or whatever with, right? The guy looked like a very normal kind of guy.
Yeah, of course.
Like you're, actually pretty mellow for an American, and he was totally welcoming. And of course, he understood what I was doing. I had already had 4 or 5 films under my belt. And, and for him, it was like kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, what's the first project you guys put together?
Smooth Groove.
Smooth Groove.
Yeah,
that's the one.
Yeah,
so he sells it to Burton. Like, does he kind of...
No, I actually...
You did all the work on that.
Well, actually, what I did is I had a friend, and I said, look, I got a star, I got a story. Do you want to invest some money? And so the guy, lent me... $50,000.
Holy crap!
Right, which was for me was a lot of money.
That's a good budget for a
well, it's not
for a
really
small film.
I mean,
yeah,
we're making films for $1 million a show here, right?
Right,
so
right.
It's all relative. But anyway, and then I went and I said, oh, we're making this film. So we went out there and we filmed. We were shooting everything on film. We made the movie, and I finished the movie, and then I sent a copy to Jake Burton. And I said, hey, I made this movie. Are you interested and you like it or whatever? And I remember, and I kept that letter for a long time, but Jake wrote me a letter that he faxed. And he said, I saw your movie. I think that you and Craig have captured the essence of the sport, nice. like nobody else. And yeah, we would like to buy a bunch of copies, right? So that kind of got that ball rolling.
And so then how long is it between Smooth Groove and Board with the World?
Every year. We started to make a movie every year.
So it was next year.
Yeah. So we finished that. We finished Smooth Groove. We did the sales and everything. And then Jake said, well, I'll sponsor your next film.
That's incredible. So do you remember Jacob Best, I've been talking with him. He's the guy that you filmed with up in
Yeah,
Powder King.
Yeah. Jacob. Yeah. I remember him because of the Powder King thing.
Yeah. So I was going to talk to him for Craig's birthday as a special. Like every year on Craig's birthday, I do something with the show where I'm like, talk about Craig.
Great.
And so I was going to do a little side hits episode with him, but he thinks he might have COVID, actually.
Oh, yeah.
But poor guy. That was, and that was his claim to fame. Craig Kelly says in the movie, like, hey, turns out this Jacob Best guy's a great free rider.
I met this guy named Jacob Best who was riding for the Burton team in Canada. It turns out this guy's one of the rippingest free riders I've ever seen.
But that's a typical Craig, too, who would, like, quite wholeheartedly just, like, push someone else, right?
Absolutely.
Just to get them out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, by Board with the World, you guys have to have a bigger budget, obviously, because you go to Russia at some point and you go.
Yeah, the budget thing for us, it's, we were young and we just liked to be out there. So, and we kind of had this idea that we shouldn't be asking for a lot of money, which in hindsight, it's like I should have actually been asking for a lot more money.
Right.
But what we did, though, is we kind of created a system, right, where we traveled. So we had a travel budget from Burton, right, or the riders had budgets, right?
Yeah.
And then they incorporated that with their promotional shoots. And so, we kind of built it. And, it was lucrative, right? So it paid the bills.
Excellent.
But, it was no, like, Warren Miller size lucrative.
Right. But you build pretty quickly. Like, Board with the World is one of those films that most snowboarders, all snowboarders from the era saw it. Most snowboarders that are on my show watched it incessivly. Like, we got that. How did you land on Joe Satriani? I don't know.
Well, it is another, it's so, we were just starting to get along with Craig and move along. And so Craig wanted to get involved also, in the filmmaking process.
Cool.
And then at one point Craig said, oh, yeah. And then I was going, well, what do you listen to? And he came up with this Joe Satriani, and he had like Surfing with the Alien, right?
Right.
And I heard that Joe Satriani was playing in Spokane. So I talked to the management, and I said, well, I got the world champion snowboarder, and he'd like to, so we actually went down to Spokane and met with Joe and Satriani and went to Chase concert, then met with him, and we gave him a snowboard, and he goes, I don't do that kind of stuff, and we go, well, you know what, man, we're happy you have a snowboard. So from there, we talked to Ken Burns Management and did a license. It was a really, the management were going in those days, they didn't know what the snowboard film was or where it's going to go or whatever, right? And the money we talked about for them was just they weren't even going to move. But then he said, well, you guys seem like a bunch of nice guys, so just send me a check, and that was it. And so
that's awesome.
That's how we did the deal.
Yeah, because if you look at, it's quite a few years later, but the Whiskey videos that Kearns and Johnson did, there's some bootleg, they didn't ask for the rights to the music. And so years later, MTV does a huge documentary with the Jackass guys on the Whiskey videos.
Oh, they did, eh? I didn't know that.
Well, that's because it never came out, because when it came down to the end of the deal, they tried to get Johnson and Kearns to sign over to be, on the hook for the rights to the music of the original. and they took it to their lawyers and just said, not if you want to, your exposure on this is a lot. You've got the
it's
Who
huge.
in there. You've got these amazing
It's not like
songs.
you can argue that you kind of try to, or or you lost a contract.
Well, that's the thing, is that MTV knows. So then MTV looked at the rights and went, oh, well, we can't put this documentary out even.
Anyway, that's a pretty common story altogether within the snowboard industry, and we kind of came more from a a legal perspective.
You knew what you were doing. You were
well,
a
yeah, but
filmmaker.
part of it is because we actually had we did a documentary on climbing and skiing the North Face of Mount Robson, and we had one of our partner was supposed to take care of the music. Kind of the same deal. We had met with Carlos Santana, so we had met with them, and we had met with the management in San Francisco while talking with the North Face company.
Yeah.
And we had lunch with them, and then the guy said, "Oh yeah, you want to use Carlos' music? Yeah, that's fine, right?" And then this one partner was supposed to take care of all the music, and we went out there, we cut the movie, finished the movie. It was a broadcast movie for CBC, and then they went, "Well, where are the rights?" And we went, "Well, where are the rights?" And they were like, and then we called them up and they said, "No way," And then, so then, we learned that, if you want to go that route, you better line up your dots and your ducks in a row.
Well, I bought the Joe Satriani album because of your movie.
Yeah. And that was the other side of the whole thing. And that's why also, even if we're talking about licensing and music and all that, it's also why a lot of that stuff kind of went by, because it wouldn't be cool for a company to sue, and then there was just no money, right? But they also understood the promotional value,
right? Yeah, anyway, that's cool.
But that doesn't talk to me. Let's just go back to Craig.
Yeah, Craig's the best. So you mentioned that Craig took an interest in the filmmaking process, or just
he wanted to get more involved, yes, but I mean, it really narrowed down to time management, right? And also, and he basically got a lot more interested in where the camera would be placed to shoot certain things, right? So on the mountain, he understood what would be the next thing, but he would do that with photographers too. And the photographers would do that with him too. And they would do that with other writers too, right? They
Absolutely.
would go, "Okay, you're going to go there, you're going to do this. I think I'm going to place myself there." And the guy said, "Well, maybe I should go there." And that's kind of
I'm goofy footed. Let's try and get this slash from that angle or whatever. Yeah. So that's cool. Yeah. Was he kind of a leader in the group? Well, there's not really a group. He's the guy. He's the world champion.
He was the leader.
The star of the
I
show.
mean, he brought in the other writers along the way, right? And these were times where, that whole period starting in '86 and in the early '90s is where growth was phenomenal, right? And so there were all kinds of stuff going on, right? And it was who's shooting with who and who's doing what with who and all that,
Yeah.
And we were pretty impervious to all that because, we were shooting with Craig. So we just go, where do you go? We go, right?
Yeah.
So, and, and Craig liked that. So what happened too is that that came, Bored with the World basically was Craig quitting competing. Right. And so he had been 3-time world champion then. Right. So suddenly he was looking at a way of getting exposure outside of competition. Right. Well, traveling and making movies is definitely where it was at.
Yeah.
Right. So that kind of that whole thing kind of got together and built this junction where it's it was like a, the perfect fit. Right. It was it just happened to be. And then, but for us, it was all an organic kind of movement, right? We just kind of did it because we were already traveling and making movies. That was pretty well what we were doing. We were doing documentary about traveling to mountains, right? And either climbing or skiing them. Yeah. All right. So then at this point, we're like, okay, well, we're just going to do it with snowboarding, right? So and that was it.
And how did the locations get picked? Did you send out a bunch of letters to a million places?
No, we were kind of and then I would mostly go to Craig or somebody. Like a photographer would call me and he'd go, "Oh, I got this idea about going there," right?
Yeah.
And he knew that us being part of it would make it happen a lot more.
Right.
So that happened like that. Or Craig would come up about an idea, or somebody would approach Craig, right, and go, "Hey, I would like to do this." And then Craig would go, "Well, yeah, okay, I'll do it, but I need to bring my film crew."
Cool.
Right. And so that's how the location were picked. And also for me, because of the time we spent in the mountains and talking to other mountaineers about different places and all that, right? So that kind of again, it was all pretty organic, homogeneous, kind of going the phone would ring, we just organize something, we'd call in and everything, and then boom, we'd do it.
That's incredible. Was John Buffrey a part of Craig's entourage at that point?
Not at that point. No,
not yet.
John came in like way later.
Oh, way later.
Yeah. We were like, basically, I don't know the exact time, but I would say like, around the 2000.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because Craig had
Split boarding,
moved to
and
Nelson,
that kind of stuff. Yeah,
and then and that's really where this all shifted, and we weren't even doing the movies at that point.
Yeah, because you'd moved away from Craig-centric movies, maybe even after Board with the World. Craig would be in the movie, but he wouldn't be.
So then they became the team movie.
Yes.
And then they became the we want more different companies in there.
Totally, yeah.
So and then they became style-centric movies. So you would have the freestyle, you would have the alpine, you will have
Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego.
Yeah.
That was fun. Yeah. That was super cool.
Yeah, so it kind of moved like that, and then it became totally insane because because then we really entered the Japanese market quite a bit, and at that point, I think we were doing like, maybe 8 or 9 or 10 movies a year.
Holy jeez.
Right? You guys wouldn't see most of them. We would have our highlight show.
Yeah.
But there would be all these other offsets. We did an avalanche safety video. We would do like a Japanese rider video. We would do a Japanese version video. We would, and
incredible.
Well, it all stemmed from which, it got a little out of hand, to be honest with you. Because at the end of the day, it all came down to shelf space.
Yeah.
Right. So basically every year there would be more and more guys, and there'd be guys with their high or their mini DV, right, and shooting with their buddies, right, and making a video with like a couple of guys puking in it, and it would be like, totally. Wow, this is so rad, and then they would get all the exposure, and they would get the shelf space.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Which we were probably like, we definitely were old school. I have no issue with that. I know that. That's the kind of film we were doing. We were doing films. We'd like to spend time at our craft, and we'd like to spend time making them look good, and and everything. And but obviously, at the end of the day, it's how many are in display, and how many guys are going to buy those.
Absolutely.
Right. And so in order to compensate for that, we ended up going into the number of videos we would do.
Sure.
Right. And that worked, but it just became like, it was definitely became like a grind,
as opposed to the soulful, fun, excitement of traveling the world with Craig Kelly.
And really like meeting new people, going new places, and making new friends.
Totally.
All that, right? I mean, it was like, it did, and so, which is fine. We had our ride.
Happens.
Yeah.
So at what point, I'm just going to shift gears to Let It Ride. I'm going to say it, I was going back and forth on whether I would say it or not. I didn't love the title of it just because of the gambling reference.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that...
But it wasn't, right?
He wasn't really a gambler. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, he totally was a gambler.
But then when I think about it...
Oh, yeah.
I go, well, he quit school at the very end to gamble on a career as a snowboarder, as a professional snowboarder. But
no, not only was he a gambler, he was a good gambler.
Right.
Because he'd never show you his cards, and he'd never show you like his face, and he totally listened. Like he always observed and see, and then when he was observing, he was churning it up in his head. And it was like, so Craig was a good gambler. But the idea actually of Let It Ride came from a couple of things. One of them came from the Bachman Turner Overdrive song, right? Just let it ride.
Yep.
But, and then of course there was the allusion to riding the board. But really it's this, the idea that we talked about was the fact that he would let it ride. That's what he would do. He would take a gamble and see where it would go. Right. And I mean, and down to, poetically, if you want, and not even wanting to be cold-hearted about it, down to like him, like dying in the mountains from an avalanche. Right. So, he was letting it ride. He wanted to be a guide. He wanted to learn. He went to learn from the best. He took everything on his side. He just go for it. But that's the thing about the mountain. Right. You're gambling in the mountains. I mean, sure, you try to get as many like, aces in your pocket and all that, and you try to play smart, and everything, but you're always gambling.
Risk mitigation.
Yeah.
That's what they talk about, right? You're always mitigating risk.
And that's what he was learning, right? But I mean, risk mitigation is pretty well life, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's like, it's like every time you go out the street, you are mitigating risk. I mean, it's quite well mitigated. You got the red light, you got the green light. If you stay to that, if you stick to the green and the red, you should be fine.
So did you have a lot of fun putting the movie back together, or was it a reverent kind of, mournful process where you're like mourning this guy, or a bit of both?
Let It Ride?
Yeah.
Oh, no, Let It Ride was a pretty awesome movie to make. I mean, you basically have a very incredible poetic story that spanned around the world.
Yes.
About an individual, right? So that's quite amazing, and I had pretty well all the money that I wanted to do it, right? Which is also a good thing, right? But it was a hard process, right? Because you're dealing with emotions, with a lot of people, and you're also dealing with criticism,
of course,
because of all the subject, and I mean, I had a couple really time where I was like pretty freaking depressed, right? But I had really nice key people to work with me on that. My editor was pretty amazing. At the end of the day, I'm very proud of the movie, right? And so that made it worth, But that's kind of like the story of making films, right? It's like it's a long, hard process, which hopefully will make you happy at the end.
Right. I think because of the process of interviewing people like Ken Achenbach, who were like friends of Craig's, Jeffrey Fulton from down at Mount Baker, Kelly Joe, talking with his sister Gillian and his mom, Janet, like all these people, you get this bigger picture. Whereas when I first started, Ken Ock actually put the idea in my head, like, ooh, there was something nefarious about Rudy. And like he hated snowboarders, and that played into it. I'm looking at your face, and if I could describe it to the listeners,
it's totally not true.
Totally not true.
Yeah.
But going on that premise, I was able to find, the tail guide, who was not a huge fan of Rudy, to be honest. The tail guide was very critical of the day of Craig's, of the big avalanche.
Well, there were quite a few people who were very critical of the big avalanche, and that's a fact. There are quite a few full accredited guide who were very critical of what Rudy did that day.
Absolutely.
When that happens, then all the little nitpicking also shows up, right?
Absolutely.
So, like, Rudy is a very opinionated person.
Yes.
He walks the walks and talks the talks. Like, he's out there doing it, really living up in the mountains,
Yes.
And everything. It's his life passion. So he's very passionate. Anytime an accident happens, people want to find reasons.
Yes.
Right? Because that's the only way they can deal with the pain or the loss or whatever, or the complexity of something like that happening. So they'd rather just go, oh, it happened because of that. But, that happened. It was very kind of touchy for us because it was really fresh.
Yes.
And there was also a big legal question with insurance with Rudy.
Absolutely.
So, and all that and everything. But, and sure, you can always make the call that, after the fact, like Rudy didn't set himself to go out there that day and kill 7 people.
No, absolutely not.
So his decisions were made according to what his knowledge, his understanding, and that's why you have a guide.
Yeah.
Right? That's why you hire someone and you trust someone, right? If there is a mistake made, that's you trusted that person because that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Ken Wiley was the tail guide, and Ken actually comes to the conclusion in his book, if you read it, and I've read it a couple times, that essentially the bad feeling that Ken had about Rudy was basically a bad feeling about himself, where he said, like, I had a fucking bad feeling about where we were and I didn't speak up. And that's what he comes to the realization at the end is like, holy shit, man, if you got a feeling about where you are, you think you shouldn't be there, and somebody's telling you trudge ahead, and you don't say, no, we're not going ahead.
Then you're part of the problem. Right. And that's a very honest thing for him to do.
Big thing.
And you know, it's a reality of mountaineering.
Yes.
I mean, it's not just like, you know, here it became a big thing because it was Craig and, you know, and everything.
Yes.
But, you know, and it was like, it was a pretty traumatic thing. And I mean, honestly, like I've talked to some of the survivors and some of the people who died, their family, their wives, and all that. And you know, nobody came up with that.
Right.
Like nobody. Everybody's going like these guys were there because they wanted to be there. That was you know their call. They knew what they were doing, and they trusted Rudy.
Yeah, and so seeing Rudy in your film actually softened my thinking on that, and then once I looked into it more, I realized, oh well, there's a reason.
He's a human being.
There's a reason he's in the film. There's a reason that Craig wanted to be there.
Yeah,
because he was the best, and Craig wanted to learn from the best.
Yeah, and I you know I got to thank you know my filmmaker partner friend Christian Begin there for going to Rudy and doing that interview because I you know and he basically Christian went up with his skis and tore up to Rudy's cabin.
Oh wow!
With all his gear to do the interview, and
that's
that kind
incredible.
of like made Rudy get involved, engage.
Yeah,
right?
engage.
Got him to engage.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you friends with Patrick Kelly before the Let It Ride thing? Like, had you met?
I had met
Craig's
Pat.
dad? Yeah.
I had met. Yeah, I was. I don't know if I would say I was his friend.
Right.
But
right,
I mean,
right.
yeah. No, I had met Pat a couple of times. He was really happy what we were doing with Craig. You know?
Of course.
You know, and
he was a big fan of his son. Obviously.
Well, you know, who isn't, right? I mean, I mean, you know, everybody's a big fan of their son. You should be.
Yes,
know,
absolutely,
you know.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that's a heavy topic. It sucks when somebody passes away in snowboarding, especially, and that was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, impacts to the snowboard industry. Not just guiding, not just people who are out in the backcountry, just snowboarders in general. It was like, wow, we've lost this amazing dude.
Yeah, no, it definitely was an intense time, and it was it was a hard topic to approach people.
Yeah,
but I found a way to do it. And one of the way to do it for me was the fact that I knew Craig, right? I mean, I knew some of Craig, right? And I had traveled with him, and I knew all the people I was interviewing. I was at Kelly Jo's wedding, right? You know, I mean, I had met Pat quite a few times, you know, so, and, you know, it was kind of a funny thing too, because, you know, when Craig, first of all, like, you know, you got to understand that for me, dying in the mountain is not something that I don't expect. Like, I mean, it's like, you know, I had quite a few friends dying from either being caught in an avalanche or falling off a cliff. Not too often falling off the cliffs, but or you know, kayaking. You know, getting in the wrong spot. Right. It's part of what these people do. Right. I mean, it's part of the equation.
Yes.
And if you forget that becomes dangerous, right? So most people don't forget that. They know that, you know, you got a certain sense of safety, but it's always backed up by an immense fear of what could happen.
Yes.
Right. And so so for me, like, you know, like the news was like, oh shit, it really sucks. you know? But I mean, it wasn't like, you know, oh my God, this could have never happened. Right. And then, so from there, you know, and then I went on and I did a little memorial video that I brought over to the Bellingham for the memorial for Craig, you know, and then I went home and really didn't think much of it at that time. And then my phone started ringing about people asking me for footage of Craig. And then, like, you know, there'll be like a couple of yahoos from California, right? It was like, we're going to make a movie on Craig. It's going to be the shit, man. And, you know, and then like, oh, can we get all your footage? And of course, they would always start the conversation, which is a funny thing. They would start by like, can we swear on this?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, they would basically what I used to call, they would suck my dick, right? I mean, they would go, oh yeah, we saw the Smoot Groove, man. We think it's just the best.
Yeah,
And then we want to make a movie about Craig, and can we like have your footage, right? And so that started to resonate a couple of times, and Pat would come to me and go, well, these guys call and they want to do this and all that. And then I went, well, wait a minute, like I'm a filmmaker. I've traveled with Craig. I've interviewed Craig many, many times. I've got tapes of all that stuff. I own all that material, and I own all that film.
Yeah.
Well, that's my next movie,
Right.
And so
Right.
it took me 3 years to realize, to get to that point, right?
Right.
And then, we got to go and raise the money and all that. But again, so I was in the right position at the right time. And then again, by the same token, being able to go, well, who's making Craig's movie? Well, the guy who's been shooting with him for 10 years. Okay, well, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It was like, this is not like Frank and Wallace from Hollywood,
Yeah. Yeah.
who are going to make the bomb, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, no, we don't want to make the bomb. We want to make the story that honors what Craig did. And then in order to do that, you have to know who he was. And I'm sorry, you don't know who he was, right? So it was all pretty organic. But like I said, there was a few times I remember specific, like with Jake, rest his soul, like, where like I went to interview him the first time on the Craig movie, and we got into he got really angry. And again, this, and I know Jake fairly well.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked with him quite a bit, and he was a good friend. I consider him a good friend of mine. His family, they were really nice to me.
Yes.
And, but again, this is typical of what you talked about before, right? Is that mostly Jake wasn't really pissed off at me. He was pissed off that Craig died, right? And so me there was bringing that up, right?
Absolutely.
And when you bring that up, you also bring your own mortality, right? The whole finish, how everything has an end, right?
Yeah.
And we don't really like to deal with that.
No, man.
Right, in general, right? So by the same token, that kind of goes back to Rudy and all that, and the accident and all that,
Absolutely.
and how making the movie, the process of making the movie, what you have to go through, right?
Yeah.
I've learned about these things way after making the movie, right? When I had to start to deal with my own mortality and face, different things and going, okay, so you know what? It might end at one point, right? So then the question is that, okay, how are you going to live now, right? If it's going to end at one point, what are you going to do about it today, right?
Yeah.
And so then suddenly you go, okay, well, what's most important for me, right? So when you do that, then you realize that Craig totally did that, right? He was just like, Craig lived life like 100%, He never really wasted a moment, right? Even to do pranks, right? He still wouldn't waste that moment. Like if an opportunity was there that he felt was good for him, he would go in and pursue that. And when he would pursue it diligently and smartly, in order to get to his result, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, then suddenly that gives you a sense of like, I wish I had lived, like for every 10 years of my life, I had lived 1 year of Craig's life, right? I mean, I'm not saying this is what, but
I understand.
It makes you realize that, a life well lived is really what it's all about, right?
Absolutely.
And Craig was there, for sure. It was cut short, but he definitely lived it.
Yeah. I love getting back to what you said, that Bored with the World was actually his brainchild of, I don't have to compete if I can do a movie about myself. I don't have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the movie, you could tell he's disappointed he got second. Didn't he get second?
Yeah.
Somebody else beat him.
Yeah.
Mario Paulo Dabini or someone beat him.
Yeah.
And you can hear in his voice, he's like, I wish I would have won. But you don't realize, this whole friggin' movie is like, hey, can you get second and still be the best?
Yeah.
You can.
And I think more than anything else, again, that shows like how he would analyze everything and base his decisions on a very smart process. Craig was smart. There's no doubt about that.
No doubt.
And I mean, there are people who are dumb, and there are people who are smart. I
Sure.
mean, and some people are in between.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I'm in between. But definitely, Craig was smart. He had the brain power. There's no doubt. And I think a big part of this, I think, came from the way Pat raised him, right?
Good.
With the reading a lot. Craig was an avid reader, just always had a book. And he wasn't just like having a book to have a book. He would read books, right? And that's something he learned from Pat. I know that for a fact, you know. So you know, these different things, you know, kind of came to this junction with this kid, you know, and he played his card right, but he definitely let it ride.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, so we're there. I wanted to let you know too. Like, I'm sure you remember, but when I first called you about the audio podcast, I said I love Craig. I've talked to these people. You said, you know what? Go to the movie, use any footage you want of his voice. You can use anything you want. And I was like, wow, that is the opposite of what you're talking about with these California guys that are calling to try and make a buck off this guy.
Well,
make
you know,
a buck off this situation. And
you
you were so generous. I just wanted to say thank you. I never used it, but I just was like,
well, you know,
so
I mean, do you know Eric Blam?
yes.
Yeah, so Eric's writing a book.
He is. I'm so excited
on Craig,
about it.
right?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
And so, you know, he approached me and he talked to me, and I sent him all the transcript of all the interviews.
Amazing.
Right? That I did with everyone, right?
No way.
Yeah. But, you know, and then, you know, some people would go, well, you know, that's worth money or whatever, right? And I'm going like, this is so far out. The value of it is not in the money. The value of it is in the story. Yeah. Right. And it's the story of Craig. So, you know, take it, use it. Right. I mean, like, you know, spread the word. Like, you know, it's also every one of those people who made an effort into to be in part of the movie, to be in the reviews. Some of them never even made it in the cut. Right. So suddenly there's a chance for them that their story about Craig was going to be heard.
Awesome.
Right. Through the process of making the book and all
Amazing.
that. Right.
Yeah.
So it's all. Like, you know, that stuff, it's not about ownership, you know, to an extent.
Right,
but,
to an extent. Right.
But it's about story. You know, it's about the public. It's about the public aspect of it.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, people know his story, you know, and that story doesn't totally go away.
Right.
Right. And so that it doesn't disappear, because it's so easy to fizzle.
Oh, totally.
There's so much stuff out there.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, I mean, I'm doing media with the podcast, and I get money from Vans, and they say, you know, we're just supporting you doing what you do. That's awesome.
That's very nice.
It's like
I didn't even know that.
No,
So
it's
that's
such an
good.
incredible way to do it, as opposed to having your content being directed by someone saying, "Look, here you go. Here's some money." So, how did you balance it with? Because obviously, you end up selling the movie. Red Bull didn't finance it in the first place. That was after the fact. Right?
Red Bull has
TV.
nothing to do with making
Nothing to
the
do
movie.
with it. They just bought the rights to play it on Red Bull TV.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's a money decision, but also I know that you gave some money to his daughter from it. You gave money to his
Yeah. I mean,
family,
you know,
yeah.
I mean, we try to help. The process of making film is actually a very expensive process. When you get into the licensing, I mean, you know, just the music from
Yes.
Let It Ride was $250,000, right? Just
Jesus.
to write, and there's no way out of that one. Right?
Got it.
You got to go, you know. And I remember my producer, when he actually saw the bill for the music, he went, fucking $250,000 for just the music, you know. And but you know, when you're trying to license Johnny Cash, and you know, so but you know, once the movie is made, you know, the success of a movie is not in how much money you raise to make it.
Right.
That's a financial success for you, because you're getting paid decent money to do it, right? But the success of a movie is on how many people sees it, right?
Agreed.
And so, you know, unfortunately with Let It Ride, we came into this period where theater were moving from print to digital.
Got it.
But they weren't there at all.
Right.
And by the same token, VHS were gone, DVDs were in, but suddenly we were just entering the Netflix era, right? The streaming era.
Yeah.
Right? And on top of that, you had Dogtown and the Z-Boy, who had created this aura. So I cannot tell you how many times I've heard a synopsis for a film that is, well, it's like Ducktown and the Z-Boy, but with this. Right?
Yeah.
It's about a bunch of guys who were doing bicycles or, So the movie, when, we were told things were going to happen with Sony Picture.
Oh, wow.
Right? We were
That's
actually
big.
talking. Yeah, no, we were talking about, but again, meaning that the success of a movie is really about how many people sees it.
The eyes on
Right?
it. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the filmmaker doesn't read. At the end of the day, the residual in the film world, they're pretty weak.
Sure.
Right? And unless you're making a really huge success and they want you to do another one.
Yeah.
Right? Because then you get, but again, you get paid good money.
Yeah.
Right? You don't make money on the residual. All right?
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of conflicting thing going on. Like
course.
what I just told you, like, the media itself.
Yeah.
Right? So, to take a digital movie and turn it into film, you're looking at about $100,000, right? And you're looking at about $100,000 plus the prints. Each prints are like, about, I would say about $6,000, right? So if you want to open in 50 theater, right, you got to put $6,000 times 50. You got $300,000 just in prints.
Yeah.
Right. And and there were nowhere near enough theater for sustain a digital.
Did it do a theater? Were there theater?
We showed at festivals. In
festivals.
theater. We showed at Whistler. We won at Whistler. We
Yeah.
showed at Exdan. We won at Exdan.
Yeah.
We showed in San Diego. I think we got something in San Diego.
Incredible.
Different festivals, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, at the end of the day, and then with all this, there's the huge marketing that comes behind it,
Yeah.
right? So there was a whole bunch of different things. At the same time, Burton was heavily involved in, I think it was called that. No, what was it called? It was called. They were making their own movie,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
they were spending like huge amount of money on that. They were going totally the wrong way about it, and it kind of went nowhere. And they ended up the time we released our movie, they gave away their movie.
Right.
You could go to Burton and download the entire feature, and
So it's right on that cusp of
was-
streaming and everything, and movies are just falling
yeah,
away.
and the value is kind of goes everywhere,
Gone.
right?
Yeah.
So it kind of really like hurt for us, right? And a year later, I get a call from Philippe Mandela, the head of features for Red Bull Austria,
Wow.
and he tells me that he loves Ladderide, and he wants to do work with me. And so that kind of went on for quite a while. It never really materialized. I never really worked with them. But at one point they said, hey, we want to do this thing called Red Bull TV, and we want to put Let It Ride, and they offered us a fair deal.
Yeah.
And so it was like, why not?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we're not, it wasn't like nowhere near a money-making deal. I mean, it made some money.
Right.
I think, it paid for a couple excavators to do some work on my property.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the kind of money we're talking about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
We're not
yeah.
talking about apartment buildings, right? And
Totally.
the movie, everybody could see the movie,
Yeah.
right? So
Do they give you any kind of? That's it. Once you give it to them, they have the metrics. They know how many people have seen it.
yeah,
They
I don't know.
They don't keep
I don't
a ticker
know.
going and say, "Hey, Jacques, man,
Yeah. I'd like
2
to.
million people seen
I'd
this."
like to
Yeah.
know. I'd like to know, and I
That'd be
will.
cool. Yeah.
Our license with them expires like soon.
Oh,
They
yeah.
had. I think they had a 6-year window.
Yep.
For the movie to be there.
Yeah.
And so I will come back to the plate. And funny enough, I'm right now working with Red Bull on a Jake Burton movie.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Let's
it's
touch
actually-
on that for
it's
a
like-
second. Why was Jake mad? Was he mad saying like, Jacques, this is distasteful, like it's too soon or something like that? Or was he?
No. Mostly, I mean, I can put it in a nutshell. It's very
Yeah.
simple because that is really why he got mad. First of all, when I do my interviews, I never bring in the questions beforehand, right? He had this marketing guy at that point that said, oh, no, I need to read the questions, right?
Yeah, I need to be prepared.
So I
Sure.
wrote my questions, right? Which I usually have like a series of 20, 30 topics that I'm going to move on. One
course.
leads to another. And then if it goes somewhere else, I go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And sometimes I ask about something because I want to hear more about something else.
Of course.
Right? For me, the life of Craig, you cannot tell the story of Craig Kelly without telling the story of Sims and Burton.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that was capital to forming Craig.
Mystery air.
Well, not only that, but for Craig, he learned huge lessons early on. And that totally, which instead of like crying about it, made him turn around. It also made Jake look really good because Jake was fully supporting Craig.
Totally.
So that was my angle. That was I was coming in, right?
Yep.
But the thing is that for Jake, it has been a sour point for a long, long time, right? And it really kind of hurt him because he thought that I was going to like give more credential to Tom Sims' story.
Got it.
Right. And that came through my questions. And the problem was, not a problem, is that I had done my interview with Tom Sims before Jake. So I had Tom's version of the story, right?
Yeah.
And it came down to even stuff like, things that happened at contests that became kind of, not with Craig, right? Between Jake and Tom, that kind of became kind of legendary in it.
Absolutely.
That weren't true.
Oh.
Right? I mean,
the freestyle versus racing thing?
Yeah. The way that thing was...
It's not true.
Well, it's not true. If you really want to get the whole story, and I can tell you the whole story because I ended up, it's really simple in a nutshell.
Yes, please.
In a nutshell. The story goes on through books and articles and all that Jake went to California for the World Championship.
Yes.
And when they got there, Tom Sim had built a half pipe, and Jake said, half pipe is not part of snowboarding.
Got it.
Right? And that's complete BS. Because, I mean, the truth is not that far, but it's not the truth.
Right.
The truth is, and that's what I discovered by going back and talking with Jake about this.
Yes.
The truth is that they went to the World Championship not knowing anything about a half pipe.
Yeah.
And they showed up there with all their alpine gear.
Racing. Yeah.
And when they saw that, they went, wait a minute. We didn't bring any freestyle gear. We just brought our alpine gear.
Got it.
Right? And then Thompson says, it's part of snowboarding.
Yeah.
Right? And Jake said, yeah, but I don't have any gear. So it shouldn't be part of the World Championship today unless we were told ahead. Right? And that's the story. But that thing is that people like the other story so much better.
They do.
And he had and Jake had to fight all this.
Oh,
right?
yeah, totally.
And so then when I came in there, that with the fact that Craig died, that Jake was really close to Craig and all that, right? It just quickly evolved into like this thing
he
was
upset.
Where he was upset. And you know what? Give the credit to Jake too. I wrote to him. I said, look, Jake, I don't think you understand. I have nothing but respect for you.
Yeah.
And this is not where I'm coming from. I'm not coming from an angle trying to dig some dirt.
Yeah.
Right? And everything. But that story is also part of Craig's story, right? The Sims-Burton relationship.
Absolutely.
Right? So that was it. So yeah, that's basically how it
That's
came down.
really incredible. You're blowing my mind.
To be honest with you, like for me, it was really crazy because I brought in like a $5,000 a day film crew to do the interview, right? I've known Jake for like 12, 13 years. I'm thinking, this is going to be the best.
Easy peasy.
This is also going to be
Out
like
of
the
the
best
park.
thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then suddenly like within 10, 15 minutes, I'm like walking out of there going, holy crap, I might not have to make the movie without Jake in it.
It can't happen.
Right? Especially if I have Tom Sims in it. I can't do the movie without Jake.
No way.
At least,
Doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was like, I went back to Montreal. I was from Burlington. Went back to Montreal. And I was like, I remember being in a hotel room there and going like, holy crap, like this whole thing might just fall apart right now.
Oh my God.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, if I'm going to dig for the history of snowboarding, it's stuff like that needs to be said because there's a whole other side with Dmitry Milovich, and Jake was always a huge Dmitry fan.
Yeah. No, Jake gave credit where credit was due, and then the funniest thing too is that I talked to Tom Sims, right?
Yeah.
And so his biggest peeve was that everywhere he'd go, people would say to him, "You didn't invent snowboarding. Jake invented snowboarding."
Sure,
Right? And
sure.
Jake would be the first guy who would go, "I didn't invent snowboarding. I took it from one spot to another."
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
But that's not what Tom Sims would hear. He would just hear,
Yeah.
so it came down to the Olympics,
Yes.
and NBC or ABC, whoever was covering, hired Jake, or have Jake as like the inventor of snowboarding, because it was the first year that the snowboarding was an event, and so they had him there, and they didn't want to have Tom Sims.
Wow.
Yeah, so for him, Tom, right, I was like the ultimate
Yeah.
like insult.
Absolutely. And Tom had a history in skateboarding. I don't know it completely, but of also losing out to like a bigger company.
Yeah.
So like
Tom
he's in
Sim
snowboarding. He's like, I
Tom's-
don't want to lose to this guy.
Yeah, but I mean, Tom Sim was not a good businessman.
No,
Like, he's a pretty happy-going. I actually really enjoy. It's a funny thing because for me, if you want to have one of those stories, coming in from the Burton side, doing movies for Burton,
Yeah.
right? I was really never. It was an unspoken thing that I wouldn't spoke to Tom Sim, and I wouldn't spoke to Sim Snowboard or Sim's
course.
writer.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
It was like it was a really touchy thing.
Still
like
touchy. Yeah.
even to the point that it's actually really funny because if you look at Board with the World,
Yeah.
when Craig at the beginning clicks
Yeah.
on the remote control,
Yeah.
there's a Sim stickers
No.
on the remote control. Yes. Yeah, and
Because it's his.
we didn't even know.
Because it's his remote from his
But
house.
Yeah. I didn't even think we didn't. We were just so far out, right?
Yeah.
But it was noted to me.
Yeah.
Like Jake came to me and he says, "Why is there a Sim stickers in the movie?" Right? And so for me, there was like a good, close to like 20 years where I never spoken to Tom Sims, and now I'm reaching out to him.
Yeah.
And I'm going to his home.
Yeah.
And I'm spending time with him. Right?
Yeah.
He was a funny guy.
He's
he was a nice guy.
Personality out the.
I mean,
yin-yang. Like-
he was not a good businessman. He admits it himself.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And these guys, they were like in such a hot market,
Yes.
growing, and it was highly competitive.
Yes.
And Tom's was a surfer.
Yeah.
He just wanted to go surf.
Yeah.
His house. Oh, I'm gonna have to go.
Yeah.
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
No, it's okay. It's
I
okay.
have a dentist appointment.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We can take it up later.
We got to. We'll have to come back to
Okay.
it when I'm doing my season 10 for sure.
But you're
And
okay
we'll-
there, right?
Oh, we're definitely okay there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in closing, I just want to say hello to everyone of Craig's family, and and again, thank you so dearly to help me make this other project, and hopefully, we can reunite one day and celebrate a life well lived. All right.
Thank you, Jacques.
Cheers.
Cheers.